Hello! Welcome back. Today we're here to talk about 2002's Spider-Man. So, starting off with the plot and the storyline, I've got to say the first thing I noticed was for the first 15 minutes this movie moved really quickly.
Yeah.
And it was nice. I appreciate how fast they were moving because, like, in the first 15 minutes, you already have Peter bitten by the spider, and you also already have Norman Osborn affected by the goblin gas or whatever that was. Mm-hmm. So you already have your main hero and your main villain established within the first 15 minutes of the movie, and that was nice. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed that. There's actually a lot of things about this story that I really liked. There's also some things that I really didn't like. One of the things that really bothered me in this story was the exposition of Tobey Maguire, like reading the story, like reading a script. Mm. You know, if somebody told you this is a happy tale, they lied. Mm-hmm. I don't like read exposition. I want to see it. And, you know, it didn't happen very often. It only happened in two places, but those were two places too many.
Just the narrating of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But I will say I really enjoyed many parts of the story. I appreciated how fast it moved. I really appreciated character development. I like that they had established that Harry and Peter were friends in the very beginning. They liked each other. And they also had a little bit of rivalry going on because they both really liked Mary Jane. And that's going to play a whole, like, the rest of the story ends up being about that.
Yeah, well, I was also going to say this. One thing I really, really liked, and I was going to bring this up later, but now seems like a good time.
Because we're already here. So.
Yeah, I really, really liked the dynamic, the story told between Peter, Norman, and Harry.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to me because, you know, you have Norman Osborn, who's this very successful, very rich, very smart man, who has a son, Harry, who's not really up to that level.
Kind of an underachiever.
Yeah, he's an underachiever. Yeah. And so he's kind of a disappointment to Norman, but then Peter comes along. Peter's Harry's best friend, and Norman just likes Peter a lot. He sees a lot in Peter. He wants Peter as a son, kind of.
Yeah.
And
which makes his betrayal of Peter even more heart-wrenching.
Yeah, yeah. So that was really cool. But then you also see, like, the conflict in Harry, where he's like, he likes Peter so much, but he also is jealous of Peter because he sees his dad treat Peter in ways he's never been treated himself. Yeah. And I just, you know, I liked that dynamic a lot. And so any part of the movie that was focused on that was really good to me. What I did not like, and this is what kind of docks the plot for me quite a bit, because I spent a lot of time on this, is anything that had to do with Peter and Mary Jane. Yeah. And a lot of that has to do with, one, the writing was pretty terrible in those lines, but also the acting.
The delivery of those scenes was very, very poor.
Very poor.
It was very, very poor. I wanted to say one more thing about Harry, that relationship of the three men. Mm-hmm. One thing that I wanted to say is that it really builds up that Harry wants to win the approval of Norman. Yeah. And that ends up being a huge motivating factor for him as a character. Mm-hmm. Because you see, and it's not just between him and Peter. Yes, he is a little jealous that Peter is getting some of that fatherly love from Norman. But you also see it when Norman starts to speak out against Mary Jane. He's not happy, but when Mary Jane starts to speak out against his dad, he says, why don't you shut up about things that you don't understand? Yeah. And that's a really big driving point for Harry. It really drives him as a character. I want my father's love, and that means more to me than the relationships with other people. Yeah. And that ends up, I mean, when he feels that Spider-Man, at the very end of the movie, when he feels that, spoilers, when he thinks that Spider-Man killed Norman Osborn, he hates Spider-Man. It doesn't matter what good Spider-Man has done. Yeah. He hates him because he was the last person alive with his father. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of really good in this story that I really liked. The other thing I was going to say, besides obviously all the scenes with Peter and Mary Jane that just did not work for me at all, it felt to me like after the first 15 minutes, the story didn't have overall a real big plot line. It had plot lines in it that would like stop and new one would begin. So you have like Peter and Norman become the good guy and the bad guy, and Peter starts to learn that he has like these powers and that he needs to treat them with great power comes great responsibility. I say it has a responsibility. And Peter is starting now to become a hero in New York, and we have to decide if they like him or not. And the Green Goblin starts showing up. You know, it just like stop with different these plot lines. And so when you walk at this movie as a whole, a lot of it didn't feel choppy exactly, but it just didn't feel like it couldn't maintain my interest because every time they started a new plot point, they would end it and then it would start something new. And I found myself bored through a good chunk of the middle of it.
There were definitely some scenes that I felt a little bored in as well. I gave the story a 4 as a whole. I feel like as the majority of the story, I was very interested. Now, granted, it's probably been longer since I've seen this movie since you had, so I hadn't remembered very much of it.
Could be.
But I will say that I thought that the story was pretty good. I felt like it all flowed pretty well. I will say that I agree with you. It's almost like they were afraid to try to juggle 2 plots at the same time. Like a plot and a subplot. They wanted to have like the one overarching plot of actually the whole series, but of this particular movie, was the relationship, like the love triangle between Harry, Peter, and Mary Jane.
Right. And like I said, I don't like that love story because those actors are. So that did dock a little bit. I gave it a 3 out of 5 because I liked a lot of individual scenes a lot. And I did like a lot of what they were doing. But when you look at it as a whole movie, it didn't work very well for me. So I lean more towards liking it than disliking it. But it's not super good to me. So I gave it a 3 out of 5.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
The acting in this movie and the characters in this movie were pretty standard. I didn't feel very one way or the other. I will say this. Tobey Maguire has some really poor line delivery.
Yeah.
Very, very, very poor. Especially when he's not behind the mask. I think that... Here's the thing. When I was younger, I used to defend him a lot. Mostly because Peter Parker is supposed to be nerdy. You know, and I appreciated that Tobey Maguire played a nerdy Peter Parker. He's significantly more nerdy than the other Peter Parkers than we get.
Agreed.
However, you can be nerdy and still deliver your lines well, and I didn't feel like Tobey Maguire did that.
No.
And actually, with the exception of Willem Dafoe, most of the actors I felt that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And that includes Franco. Which Franco was that?
James Franco.
James Franco.
Yeah.
James Franco did okay compared to some of the other people, but I still feel like Willem Dafoe stole the show.
He absolutely did, and I was actually going to say that. So you are talking about Tobey Maguire, and I kind of agree. He's probably my least favorite Spider-Man. I know he plays a very traditional Peter Parker, which a lot of people love, but I have just never liked him as Spider-Man. He's just not sarcastic enough. He's not funny enough when he's behind the mask. His Peter Parker's decent, but his Spider-Man is just not what I wanted in a Spider-Man. So I don't like Tobey Maguire. Kristen Dunst is
tough to watch,
and especially when they're together. Those are really hard scenes for me to sit through.
Yeah, she does a better job when it's just her.
Yeah,
but they have no chemistry.
That's the biggest problem.
Yeah, they have no chemistry.
The biggest thing they gave Kristen Dunst to do in this movie is to act like she was in love with Spider-Man, and that was fine. But it's just that their chemistry was like at negative level, so it just was terrible. So I didn't like her. James Franco, I agree, he's okay. He's better than those two were. But Willem Dafoe, I love Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. I think he's fantastic. He was perfect. He's very over the top, but
it feels right.
Owns it. Yeah,
it feels right when he owns it.
I've always loved him in this movie. He makes this movie watchable to me. Like, I will go and watch this movie because of him.
Yeah,
he is really, really good. He's a very minor part in this movie, but J.K. Simmons is Jonah Jameson.
Oh, he's unbelievable.
Fantastic.
Unreal. I'm gonna level with you guys. I gave this movie acting a 2.5, but then I gave JJ a full point higher.
Yeah.
So as a whole, I gave it a 3.5 because Jonah Jameson was
J.K. Simmons
phenomenal.
Yeah.
J.K. Simmons was phenomenal in that role.
Yeah, no, he really brings that character to life, and there's a reason no one's been able to replace him because he was so good.
Yeah.
I gave it a 3 out of 5 because of him and Willem Dafoe. If those two hadn't been in this movie and hadn't been as good as they were, I would have given it a lot lower of a score because the acting is pretty subpar besides those two. Those two do save it to an extent for me because I love watching them.
For sure.
Who can stop us? Or imagine if he joined us.
As far as the action goes, this has been my favorite action of any of the movies we've seen so far. It was just the most cool to look at. I think Spider-Man, he's more hand-to-hand combat, which I definitely appreciated. And it wasn't quite as gymnastic-y as the Batman movies were when it came to the hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways it was more.
In some ways.
In some ways it was more, aerobatics, acrobats. It was cool to watch.
Yeah.
The stunt double was phenomenal.
He was really good.
I want to give a shout out to the stunt double. I don't know what his name was, but he killed it.
He's really good.
I'm gonna feel really stupid if that was Tobey Maguire.
It was not Tobey Maguire.
I didn't think
there's
so.
No way.
Yeah, there's no way.
There's no way that was Tobey Maguire.
Tobey Maguire, if that was you, I apologize.
I don't.
But what I will say, I think it looked cool.
It did.
There are also brighter colors, which might have helped because Spider-Man. I mean, he's in the daylight instead of like the Batman's in the dark.
That's fair.
And also, he wears a bright suit, so it's like easier to see. Not that makes a huge difference, but like little things. But yeah, I mean, it was cool to watch. I really enjoyed the action.
I did too. The only thing really that's holding us back from a 5 for me is there aren't, like when I think about this movie, there aren't any specific action sequences that jump out to my memory. Like they're good to watch and they're fun to watch, but like I don't think about the action. Like I can't picture a single action sequence in my mind that's like, oh, this was phenomenal. Like I know in some of the later ones there are scenes that do that for me, but for this one, like, the only thing that kind of comes to memory is the last battle between him and Green Goblin when he jumps out of the way and the glider slams into Norman. That's, like, the one action sequence that I, like, can easily recall from my mind.
Yeah.
But, no, it's really fun to watch. Like, it's really good action.
Yeah, definitely. I gave the action a 4 for that same reason. I mean, it could have been a 5 had there been scenes, like you said, that really stuck out. Or had there been something that was game-changing. I had to give action a 4. I will say, I'm going to talk about that particular scene when we get to cinematics. But I will say that there were some. I don't particularly like when they go slow mo. I think most cases slow mo is kind of a cop out, and I feel like they did it in a couple of cases here. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in cinematics, though.
Yeah,
so.
I kind of liked it, but yeah. So 4 for me, 4 for him. Action is very good in this movie.
Godspeed, Spider-Man. Oh.
Cinematically, I did enjoy this movie quite well. I think that it holds up really well today. It feels like a comic book came to life without being 1966 Batman comic book.
Yeah.
You don't get the pals, but you really feel like you're in a comic book. Like I was saying about the slow motion, I don't always hate slow motion. I feel like in some places, like representing spider sense would be hard because how do you represent precognition?
Right?
It's difficult. They tried to do it with they did a decent job in Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr. Like the precognition, like it wasn't really the same, but like you kind of get it. So I appreciate that they did something to help us understand more than just I don't really like just like, oh, my hair's standing up, something's happening.
Right, yeah.
I don't really like that. So I appreciate that they did it. I also, like, but sometimes, like, as an example in the fighting scenes, when you see him jump and do, like, a slow motion turn, and then you see, like, the Green Goblin's, not pumpkin bombs, but those,
the razor
things. The razor things. Yeah. You see them, like, go around him. I was just like, it might be cool to have this scene go a little longer and have more of that and have it go at regular speed.
That might have been cool.
Yeah. And we'll never know how it really would have looked. But I will say that I felt like it was a little bit of a cop-out. But other than that, I mean, the coloring was phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the script was pretty poor, but, like, the cameras, we had long shots mixed in with short shots, which was cool.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the cinematics of this movie. I gave it 4.5.
I also really enjoyed the cinematics. Like I gave it a 5 because there was nothing that bothered me. I actually did like the slow-mo spider sense. I thought that was really cool. It was handled really well.
Yeah.
The costume on Spider-Man is great. This is easily my favorite Spider-Man costume that they've made. The Green Goblin costume is a little dated looking to me, but I still like it.
I like thick Green Goblin.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Thick.
It was like I said, there's really nothing about the cinematics that I did not enjoy in this movie. I really did, like Ben said, I like the old-fashioned kind of comic book transitions were cool.
Yeah.
Cinematically, I think this movie is great, and there's a reason I think this is kind of like a pioneer for a new age of superhero movies because the cinematics in this movie were like really, really good. Yeah, really good.
In my opinion, this was the first good superhero movie. Like the other ones that we watched, I enjoyed. But like they were good for superhero movies, but they weren't great movies. But I feel like this movie was a good movie and a great superhero movie.
Yeah, it was good. I definitely enjoyed the cinematics of this movie for sure. As far as entertainment goes, I was a little bit torn on it because there were scenes that I was really into it, and then there were scenes that I was really not. And I was kind of like, when is this movie going to end? And that's kind of, it really goes back to what we were talking about with the plot and storyline for me. It just, as a whole, when you tie it all together, there's just a good chunk of this that I'm bored during. But there's also a lot that I'm not. It just depends on what scene I'm watching, I guess. So I actually, just because I felt so torn on, I gave it a 3 out of 5. Because I felt like I was more entertained than not entertained, but there was definitely a lot of parts where I was very wanting the movie to be over during.
I gave it a 4. I really enjoyed it. There were not very many scenes when I was like bored. I will say the scene where Aunt May is in the hospital and Peter is saying how Spider-Man feels about Mary Jane is like one of the worst scenes.
So bad.
And maybe in cinematic history.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not true.
No, Batman and Robin's got far worse.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I mean, I do think that the screenwriters of this particular movie should repent for that scene.
No, absolutely.
It was not good. They will answer to God. No, I mean, as a whole, I enjoyed the movie. And I was very entertained. I'd be more likely to watch this movie than any movie that we've reviewed thus far. I'll likely watch most of them again, but this one is the one I'll probably watch before the rest of the other ones. It was entertaining. It was fun. I gave it 4.
Yeah, I gave it a 3, but... So when you take the time to average out my scores, it came out to a 3.6 out of 5, which is the best score that I've given anything so far by like 0.1 or something like that. But it was like, this is definitely a good movie. It's just, it's not a fantastic one to me, but it's good. It's very good.
Yeah, if you average out all of mine, you get a 4, which I think is above average by a lot for me. I think this is higher than the next one by like a whole half a point or something ridiculous. Maybe not. Maybe just 0.2. I'm not sure exactly. But I will say that I put this movie significantly higher than the rest.
Yeah. So averaging our scores together, we give it a 3.8 total out of 5, which... That is the best score we've given it together. Movie. So that's a good score. Spider-Man 2002, definitely worth a watch, and even a rewatch if you haven't seen it in a while. It's a good one. It does hold up pretty well.
It does.
Given the fact that it's like 20 years old now, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah,
but,
I was very impressed.
Yeah, pretty good movie.
I guess next week we'll figure out which movie might not hold up as well as we watch Daredevil.
2003's Daredevil. I've seen this one once, a long time ago. I liked it as a kid. Let's see if I like it as an adult.
We'll see if it holds up. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next week.
Later.